In 1994, the citizens of Miramar, Florida were preparing themselves for radical change. With a population of nearly 50,000 people, they were no small village, and sitting just about 40 minutes northwest of Miami, they were no stranger to development either. However, this was different. A new project was coming to their region, and it would be the largest entertainment undertaking in Florida since Disney themselves first came to the state decades prior. Featuring sports stadiums, shopping districts, offices, hotels, and even a theme park, it would have dwarfed the likes of Universal Studios. The company behind it all? Blockbuster. Yep, that Blockbuster. This is the tale of Blockbuster Park and how the dream rose and fell in just 2 years. For such a large and significant project, Blockbuster Park was born with little fanfare. During the summer of 1993, towards the end of an earnings call and while answering questions from investors, it was casually mentioned that Blockbuster was exploring the idea of a sports and theme park complex in Florida. It wouldn't be until later that year in the fall of 1993 that the company would start to actually reveal details for the park. Sitting on a total of nearly 2,500 acres, Blockbuster Park would feature a 45,000-seat baseball stadium, a 20,000-seat hockey arena, and a theme park that featured traditional rides, virtual reality experiences, and what they called simulation theaters. There would also be an area named Blockbuster Village, which would offer restaurants, shops, a 24-screen movie theater, a comedy club, live music stages, a marine stadium, a practice hockey rink, and a discovery zone, which was only relevant because at that point Blockbuster owned 20% of Discovery Zone. It would also be home to office spaces, multiple hotels, and just over 1,000 medium and low-income homes and apartments for some of the estimated 17,000 people expected to work at the park. Blockbuster, who also owned controlling stake in Spelling Entertainment at the time, considered the possibility of television and film recording studios at the park as well. And it was also never really specified, but I also assumed there were plans for a Blockbuster video in there. All in all, it was a massive complex, one that would start out with an estimated price tag of $1 billion before doubling by the time the idea died. But before we get into how and why it died, there's first the question of why it was even an idea to begin with. By 1993, Blockbuster was already the undisputed king of video rental in the United States, and they had the revenue to prove it. But sports venues? Not just one, but 4? It wasn't really their thing. But it makes more sense once you get to know the person who was running Blockbuster at the time, Harry Wayne Huizenga. In 1962, at the age of 25, and with just one truck, Wayne Huizenga started a garbage company called the Southern Sanitation Service in the Fort Lauderdale area. He would build up and grow the company over the following 22 years. When he left in 1984, that company, which was by then called Waste Management Incorporated, was the largest waste management company in the country, and with it, he amassed a fortune. In 1987, Wayne would then go on to use part of that fortune to invest $18 million into a small venture called the Blockbuster Entertainment Corp. that had recently shifted over from creating software for the oil industry to renting out home videos. By the end of that year, he, along with 2 others, would buy out the company, and under his control, he would apply the same drive for expansion that helped grow his garbage company. This business prowess would earn him an estimated net worth of over $1 billion, and he wouldn't wait long before putting it to use. In 1990, he would invest $30 million in return for a 15% stake in the NFL team, the Miami Dolphins, as well as 50% ownership of Joe Robbie Stadium. The very next year, for the low price of $95 million, the MLB would award Huizenga one of 2 new expansion baseball teams, creating the Florida Marlins. The year after that, the NHL would award him with a new expansion hockey team, the Florida Panthers. Within 3 years, Blockbuster's chairman owned 2 major league sports teams in Florida and had significant ownership of a third. Suddenly, the idea of a Blockbuster sports complex didn't seem so random. But Blockbuster Park, or Wayne's World as some began to fittingly call it, would face an uphill battle. As they spent over $35 million on land, concerns began to spring up over the impact the project would have on the region. Most notably, the land for the park was just a couple of miles away from the Everglades. While Blockbuster themselves had no plans to build any closer, history showed that the introduction of a major entertainment complex like that usually brings a bunch of additional development after it opens. Tons of businesses try to capitalize on the opportunity that millions of tourists a year bring with them. This raised environmental concerns that ranged from what it would do to the local wildlife to how it would impact water treatment and availability in the area. On top of that, trying to accommodate a park that massive would require some pretty significant transportation expansions, including extended roads, extended railways, and additional bus lines, all of which would fall on the local taxpayers to cover. That cost was estimated to be as high as $91 million. Lastly, because the land was split up between Broward and Dade County, not to mention within the city of Miramar, Blockbuster would have to seek approvals from all three to move forward, which would significantly slow things down. You see, when Disney came to town to build Walt Disney World, they worked around this issue by getting the state to pass legislation that would create the Reedy Creek Improvement District. It was Disney's own governing jurisdiction that gave them the freedom to manage their own building codes and utilities, and to pay for it by taxing the district's landowners, basically themselves. It also gave them the power to build their own regional airport and power plants, as well as the power to establish their own fire department and police force. Blockbuster, facing all of the troubles that Disney managed to avoid, looked to a similar solution. They proposed a district that would grant them similar powers, and in 1994, State Representative Stephen Geller would sponsor the bill to make it happen. It took some back and forth, and ultimately the district would be a watered-down version of what Disney had decades earlier. It was essentially limited to granting them the power to tax their land, control their water systems, manage mosquito control, and issue bonds in order to raise money for development. The bill would pass in April of 1994, clearing one more hurdle on the track to build Blockbuster Park. Blockbuster had a plan, they had the land, and they were making progress on getting permission to build it all. So what happened? Viacom. Viacom is what happened. At the same time Blockbuster was planning this entertainment wonderland, the media conglomerate Viacom was in the middle of a bidding war with QVC over the acquisition of Paramount Pictures, and they were losing. That led to a proposition that appeared to be mutually beneficial, a Blockbuster-Viacom merger. Under the agreement, Blockbuster would immediately invest $1.2 billion into Viacom, giving them the funds they'd need to beat QVC and acquire Paramount. In return, Viacom would offer stock to Blockbuster shareholders in return for Blockbuster shares, merging the two into one. Huizenga would stay on as vice chairman of Viacom, with some speculating that later down the road he'd be lined up to take over the company. Initially, this merger seemed like a good thing for Blockbuster Park. Many assumed that the combined assets of these three massive entertainment companies would open more doors. Getting Paramount alone resulted in people wondering if the Blockbuster theme park would see rides based on everything from Top Gun to Star Trek. And even though Huizenga would no longer be running the show, the progress of the planning for the park left him confident that it would still get built. Over the course of that year, the merger and acquisition shifted between being a sure thing to potentially being canceled, all due to the fluctuating share prices of Viacom, Blockbuster, and Paramount. However, in July of 1994, Viacom would acquire controlling stake in Paramount Communications for a total cost of $9.7 billion. And just 2 months later, making good on the merger plan, Viacom would acquire Blockbuster for $8.4 billion. And just as quickly as the three companies joined together, Blockbuster Park's future was up in the air. After all, Viacom had just spent over $18 billion in order to grow. So they weren't what you'd call enthusiastic to spend another $2 billion on a project that, economically speaking, wasn't a sure thing. On top of that, it was a project that was outside of the wheelhouse of this new entertainment Goliath. The sports stuff might have made sense for Huizenga, but it didn't for Viacom. In fact, they'd go on to eventually sell off the sports and theme park assets that Paramount owned in order to help pay off the acquisition. They were interested in being a media company. Officially, Viacom would take some time in the fall to determine the fate of Blockbuster Park. But in December of 1994, as they were putting together their budget for the following year, they quietly scrapped the project. And just as Blockbuster Park was no longer a part of Viacom's future, neither was Huizinga. He would announce that his time as vice chairman would be limited to under a year before moving on to other endeavors. Viacom would sell the land Blockbuster had already purchased, and under the terms of the taxing district, it would be dissolved after 5 years if the park wasn't built, which it wasn't. Huizinga, who once said he preferred to build up companies rather than manage them, would ultimately go on to buy, form, and build up other companies before selling them off. Viacom would continue to grow into an even larger conglomeration, and Blockbuster, well, we all know how that turned out. Blockbuster Park raises some really interesting what-ifs. What if it had been built? Could it have helped keep Blockbuster afloat? What would it have done to the development of the Miami area? Would I have been able to use my Blockbuster card to get into the theme park? Okay, probably not on that last one. Blockbuster Park wasn't a project that died because of a fatal flaw in the design or because of regulatory red tape or even because Blockbuster didn't have the money. It was simply an idea that was formed at the wrong place and the wrong time. And now, as with many projects over the course of history, all we can do is ask, what if?
Hey, Kristen, haven't you checked this video out several times before?
Yeah, at least 5 times. I mean, I could have bought it by now, you know?
Why don't you buy it? You know, all our tapes are for sale.
No kidding? That's great, I'll take it. Oh, and you know what else? My little brother Spike has a birthday coming up.